What if I told you that in 2025, Donald Trump did something no American president in history had ever done? He threatened a traditional ally with 50% tariffs, not over trade disputes, but to protect a coup plotter who tried to overthrow democracy in his own country. This isn't about commerce. It's about power, loyalty, and the moral price of authoritarian obedience. And if you value content that challenges you to think beyond superficial headlines, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because what we're going to discover in the next 40 minutes will make you question everything you thought you knew about modern geopolitics. We're talking about Brazil, a country that for decades has been a strategic partner of the United States, that shares fundamental democratic values, that has always been on America's side in the most important international issues. And suddenly, Trump threatens this country with the highest tariffs in bilateral trade history. Why? Because Brazil's Supreme Court investigated and convicted people involved in the attack on Brazilian democracy on January 8, 2023. People who, coincidentally, are ideological allies of Trump, people who, like him, refuse to accept election results. This isn't diplomacy, it's international blackmail. It's an American president using the economic power of the United States to shield coup plotters from another country. And this should terrify us, no matter which side of the political spectrum you're on. Let's look at the facts nobody's connecting. Trump condemns Brazil for censorship against digital platforms, but simultaneously he has prosecuted more journalists than any American president in recent history, tried to revoke licenses from networks that criticized him, created his own social network, Truth Social, with stricter moderation rules than Twitter, and defended that presidents should have total immunity, including for crimes. Even more surprising, Trump accuses Brazil of persecuting big tech, but he himself promised to end Section 230, the law that protects digital platforms from liability for user content. In other words, he wants more control over social media, not less. And here's the crucial point. When Jair Bolsonaro was in power, Trump never criticized the real censorship happening in Brazil. Journalists being arrested, bloggers persecuted, press freedom plummeting in international rankings. Nothing. Total silence. The difference. Bolsonaro was an ally. The current Brazilian government investigates coup plotters, and that, for Trump, is unforgivable. We're witnessing something historic. An American president punishing a democratic country for functioning democratically, for investigating crimes against democracy, for not accepting that political loyalty stands above the law. To understand the gravity of what we're seeing, I need to introduce you to someone, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, German theologian who lived during the Nazi era and left us a devastating reflection on the nature of authoritarian complicity. Bonhoeffer wasn't just an intellectual. He was a man who faced the most difficult choice anyone can face, staying quiet in the face of evil, or resisting knowing it would cost his life. He chose to resist. He was executed by the Nazis in 1945, just weeks before the war ended. But before dying, Bonhoeffer wrote something that resonates frighteningly today. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Bonhoeffer observed how decent people, pastors, intellectuals, conservative politicians became complicit with Nazism not because they believed in the ideology, but because they prioritized stability, power, order above justice. And here's the terrible connection to what we're seeing today. Trump isn't just defending Bolsonaro out of ideological affinity. He's creating a dangerous precedent where authoritarian leaders protect each other mutually, using state power to shield crimes against democracy. Bonhoeffer called this institutional complicity. When the state apparatus itself becomes an instrument to protect crime, it's not just individual corruption, it's corruption of the system as a whole. Political neuroscience shows us something fascinating about how authoritarian leaders build loyalty. It's not through coherent ideology, but through personal bonds and mutual protection. Karen Stenner, political psychologist at Princeton, discovered that authoritarian personalities don't move based on abstract principles, but on tribal loyalty. For them, questions like right and wrong are secondary to the question, is this person from my group? This explains why we see this authoritarian international forming. Putin protecting Assad, Orban defending Putin, Modi supporting authoritarian leaders, Trump shielding Bolsonaro. It's not about shared ideology, it's about mutual protection. But there's something even deeper happening. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, who studied the Holocaust, identified that atrocities don't happen through explosions of irrationality, but through rational bureaucratic processes where each person is only their small part. What Trump is doing with Brazil is exactly this. normalizing institutional protection for coup plotters. Today it's tariffs. Tomorrow it could be investment blocking. Later, diplomatic pressure. Each step seems technical, economic, strategic. Hannah Arendt called this the banality of evil. How great atrocities are committed by normal people, who simply follow orders or do their job. And here's what scares me most. American government officials today are being forced to choose between following orders that protect coup plotters or resisting, and losing their jobs. This is the same pressure that German bureaucrats faced in the 1930s. Stop for a moment, breathe. If up to this point something has made you think differently about what foreign policy and diplomacy mean, hit that like button and share this with someone who isn't afraid to reflect on these complex issues. Because what we're going to see now will be even more disturbing. We're going to talk about how this protection of coup plotters isn't just a moral issue. It's an economic issue that's costing the American people dearly. And we're going to understand why this represents an existential threat not just to Brazilian democracy, but to the very democratic world order that the United States helped build. Here's what nobody's telling you. These 50% tariffs against Brazil are going to cost American consumers a fortune, and you know who's going to pay. Exactly the people who voted for Trump. Brazil is the world's largest coffee exporter, second largest beef exporter, giant in steel and aluminum. 50% tariffs mean American coffee will be 30% more expensive, meat 25% more expensive, construction materials 40% more expensive. But there's more. Brazil is also one of the largest buyers of American agricultural products. Soybeans, corn, wheat. When you punish Brazil, it buys from Argentina, Canada, Australia. American farmers lose billions in contracts. I'm losing contracts my family had for 30 years. And why? Because the president wants to protect a guy who tried to stage a coup in another country. This doesn't make sense. But the real cost isn't economic. It's moral. It's strategic. It's the price of transforming the United States into a country that protects coup plotters internationally. Think about this. If you're a democratic ally of the United States, Germany, France, Japan, South Korea, what do you think when you see this? You think, if I investigate crimes against democracy in my country, the US might punish me too. Polls already show international confidence in American leadership has plummeted, not because of specific policies, but because of unpredictability. Allies no longer know if they can count on the US to defend democracy. And here's the historical comparison that should scare us. This has happened before. In the 1970s, the US supported Latin American dictatorships for strategic interest. Pinochet, Videla, the Brazilian military. Henry Kissinger famously said, "I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist, due to the irresponsibility of its own people." Replacing communists with that investigates coup plotters. Trump is repeating exactly the same logic, the same arrogance, the same willingness to sacrifice democratic principles for political convenience. And we know how that ended. Decades of instability, thousands dead, and a Latin America that still distrusts American diplomacy today. This is what Trump is resurrecting. So what do we do? How do we, as citizens, as people who care about democracy, as human beings who don't want to live in a world where coup plotters protect each other? First, real political education. Not just following headlines, but understanding how democratic institutions work. Reading about diplomatic history, studying how dictatorships consolidate, understanding democratic protection mechanisms. I recommend 3 essential books: How Democracies Die by Levitsky, and Ziblatt, The Road to Serfdom by Hayek and Eichmann, and Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt. Second, critical vigilance. Question every narrative that puts stability or pragmatism above justice. Distrust any leader who says we need to protect our allies, when those allies have committed crimes against democracy. Third, active political participation. Not just voting, but pressuring representatives, participating in civil society organizations, supporting independent journalism that investigates these dangerous connections. Organizations like Freedom House, Transparency International, Reporters Without Borders need our support. They monitor exactly these types of democratic backsliding, but perhaps most importantly, develop moral courage. Bonhoeffer said the greatest sin isn't being evil, but being cowardly in the face of evil. And that applies to us, ordinary citizens. When someone in your family, at your work, in your social circle defends authoritarian leaders or minimizes coup attempts, you need to have the courage to disagree, respectfully, but firmly. As Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. But individual responsibility isn't enough. We need structural changes that prevent any president from using American economic power to protect coup plotters. First necessary reform: Congress needs to pass a law prohibiting economic sanctions against Democratic allies who are investigating crimes against their own democracies. Seems obvious, but apparently it's not. Second, creation of automatic diplomatic mechanisms. When a democratic country suffers a coup attempt, there should be immediate institutional support, not depending on the political will of the president of the moment. Third, strengthen alliances between democracies. The Summit for Democracy that Biden started needs to become a permanent institution, with real power to coordinate responses to authoritarian threats. Fourth, reform of international organizations. The UN, IMF, World Bank need mechanisms that prevent countries from using these institutions to protect authoritarian allies. Fifth, total transparency in diplomatic relations. Citizens have the right to know when their governments are protecting coup plotters. This can't be treated as a state secret. Sixth, mandatory civic education. People need to understand how diplomacy works, what the cost of foreign policies are, how to identify when leaders are using international power for personal purposes. These changes aren't utopian. They're necessary, and they're possible, but they only happen when citizens pressure for them. We've reached the central point, the moment of truth, the question that defines our era. What kind of civilization do we want to be? Bonhoeffer faced this question in 1943, Mandela in 1964, Soviet dissidents in the 1970s, Arab Spring protesters. In 2011, each generation has its defining moment. Our moment is now. And the question is, are we going to accept that leaders use state power to protect coup plotters? Are we going to normalize the idea that stability justifies complicity with crimes against democracy? Because this isn't just about Trump or Bolsonaro or partisan politics. It's about the world we're going to leave for the next generations. It's about whether democracy will survive the 21st century. Back to Bonhoeffer. The question is not how can I be good, but how can I be responsible? Responsibility means accepting that each of us has a role in this story. Every vote, every conversation, every choice to inform ourselves or remain in ignorance, every decision to speak or stay silent. History shows us that great changes always begin with ordinary people who decide not to accept the unacceptable. Rosa Parks wasn't a politician. Malala wasn't a world leader. Greta Thunberg was just a student. But they had something in common: the courage to say no when everyone around them was saying yes, or staying silent. So here's my final question for you. What idea are you willing to question this week? What difficult conversation are you going to have? Which leader are you going to hold accountable? What comfortable lie are you going to stop accepting? Leave your answer in the comments. Don't just think about it, write it, share it. Make a public commitment, because that's how change happens. One person at a time, one conversation at a time, one courageous choice at a time. If this video awakened you to the gravity of the moment we're living in, share it with someone who also needs to hear this. Not because you agree with me on everything, but because you believe democracy is defended with knowledge, debate, and courage. This is how we resist, together, thinking, questioning, refusing to accept that authoritarianism is inevitable or that protecting coup plotters is political pragmatism. History is being written now, and you are its co-author. Don't waste this opportunity. Don't let them say you didn't know, that you couldn't do anything, that you were just a spectator. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act.